Hey, and welcome to the Creative Coffee Break. Tonight, I'm extremely thrilled to introduce to you my good friend Stephen Anderson. Um, Stephen is one of those rare people who can take complex ideas and make them not just understandable, but actually fun to learn. He's been on a mission to create what he calls things to think with and spaces where people can play and discover together. He's also the best selling author, and I know he's cringing when I say this, behind the books Figure It Out, Getting from Information to Understanding, super humble guy, and also the author of, or co author of, Seductive Interaction Design. Some lucky people out there might also know or own his card deck Mental Notes, and it's kind of a bit of a cult favorite. And I am still trying to twist his arm to release the cards, but he's just playing hard to get. For the past decade, Stephen has been at the intersection of visual collaboration, learning science, and game design. He's worked with countless startups. I've been lucky to work with him in the past, and established companies, helping them discover new products and innovate in ways they never thought possible. And he's done the same for me as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Like me, Stephen has sometimes resisted being labeled the card guy, but I don't know if you saw in the beginning of the show, he's kind of disappeared into a closet, and trust me, there's tons and tons of cards in there. Even though these card decks are amazing tools. So today, I want to really talk to him, and I'm especially excited to hear him talk about the deeper theories, the frameworks, and things behind these tools. And without further ado, I bring Stephen on screen. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me today in the live stream. No coffee today, right? I don't know. For you, it's still coffee time. For me, definitely not.
It's post lunch, so water.
Yeah, I'm doing the same. Like, it's so dreaded. I have this coffee break thing, and then I drink the coffee after having a conversation. I can't sleep for the night, and maybe it's the age kicking in. But anyway, Stephen, thank you so much for joining. And I want to kind of jump straight into the conversation, and also kind of like line you up to kind of take us a little bit deeper. Is that, and we spoke about it a little bit in the last couple of weeks, is that, I've been thinking a lot about, especially lately, where there's this growing sense that folks are feeling a little bit fatigued by thinking in itself, right? There's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of data and information. And I just think that, I feel that people are getting really fatigued. And it's not just about the decision making, but sometimes also, the deeper work of thinking and the sense making around working through these things, right? I also think that sometimes we get pressured by leadership to like really supply quick and easy answers. Are we just overwhelmed by the information, or have we lost touch with how to actually think well, to make sense with things? And, how can we really energize each other when we get into these spaces? So let me throw it to you. What does thinking well mean to you right now?
Oh gosh, trying to think where to start, even with your question. I think I just wrote a post yesterday talking about the difference between knowledge and learning. And it was kind of a short rant or reaction against a lot of people turning to large language models to give them all the knowledge or give them the learning. And not that you can't get some useful information back in that way, but I was trying to draw a hard line between getting knowledge back, getting facts, which may or may not be
Yeah.
accurate, right? Which is a whole nother separate thing, and actually learning. And my point there was learning is actually, it involves active construction. It's something you have to do. So you're given all this information, you have to do something with it. And I think what do we do with information to make sense of it is definitely something a lot of us could work on. I mean, I work on every day, and that was the topic of figure it out was, okay, how do we figure it out? What do we do to actually, um, take these ideas and these concepts and make sense of them in a
Yeah.
way that's makes sense, right? In a way we
Totally.
can understand or have a map or a mental model of the territory. So whether people are, I mean, the other thing I would add is just with everything going on, especially not just with information, but misinformation and disinformation and
Yeah.
outright lies and propaganda, that can be fatiguing in and of itself, which is part of the intent of a lot of that stuff, a lot of propaganda. So I think there's the fatigue of figuring it out just because we're blasted, not with just too much information, but all this other stuff that's not quite information as well.
Yeah. No, I've had this experience, like even this week, where, some of the information that I got my hands on, it sounds and feels so damn good. I want it to be true, but you know, like, oh man, I have to go back and like really go dig through this, right? But I guess also like with the work that you've done, and especially in your books, and also like the stuff that we geek out, there's certain ways that you can approach this, right? And I know that you have certain models and things in mind to kind of guide people through this kind of approach. And if you can maybe riff a
Yeah,
little bit on that.
absolutely. So, I mean, cards are the easy one. I think you and I both like the name card guy, though I think there's more to it, right?
Totally, yeah.
But I think with cards as an example, and I'm talking literal like cards, right? I think it's about this these discrete units information that you can remix and sort and shuffle and do all these things with. Each card, is also a unit of information. So you've taken what's in your brain and you've actually written something down, externalized it, or maybe someone else has written it down for you in a published deck. And so now our ability to think with things is extended. And that's just cards, right? And you could apply some of the same logic to sticky notes, for example. There's a value in why we do sticky notes in workshops, and it's to extend our cognitive abilities. Um, it's not just the discrete units of information, though. It's also how they are arranged relative to each other. And so
Yeah.
that's where I bleed over into like diagrams or canvases or maps or these other things, frameworks that help us make sense of complex information. And yeah, when there's just too much of it, finding the right map for your purpose or what you're trying to figure out, and then adding your information or your unique information to that map can do wonders for making sense of things and figuring it out. And yeah, getting back on top, if you will, or getting that feeling of like, aha, I can surf this and figure things out.
Yeah, and it's also about this togetherness, right? Like when I spoke to you the last time, I mean, I was listening to some of the things you were sharing with me, and I know that we both come from. I mean, where we actually met officially was around. I mean, I'm sure we can say it. We worked together at Mural,
Mhm.
and a key word there was collaboration. And at
Yep.
some point, I kind of tried to really understand what it meant. And then you go into the rabbit hole around facilitation. But then at some point, and I don't think you contradict those things, but something that I really got excited about after reading some of the articles and listening to what you're talking about is it's not so much about collaboration, it's about thinking together. And the reason that I also bring this up is that it also triggered my I saw an article recently, and I've seen it. I mean, LinkedIn is sometimes not a good place to hang out in because like everything is dead, right? Someone was complaining about, like workshops are dead, it's terrible. And I'm not one here to kind of sell workshops, but they were talking about like, there's never good output from a workshop, right? And then I wondered like, did they do it for the right reason? Did they actually bring people together to think together? Right. And I have to argue that I think in some senses when you bring folks together, it's not always about the deliverable at the end. It's like, did you achieve something by working or thinking or doing things together?
Yeah, with collaboration, it's one of those words that it's thrown around a lot, but you actually see very rarely true, authentic collaboration. And going back to what you just said, like when I think collaboration, I think thinking together, working together, discovering together, learning things together. And yeah, we don't see enough of that. There's a lot of workshop theater or facilitation theater that goes on. There's a lot of like, well, we have to accomplish this thing. So right when you're in the middle of a workshop and things are going well, it's like, well, got to chop it because we have an agenda, right? Which kind of
Yeah.
defeats the purpose. And also just real collaboration and thinking together. I mean, it's not always easy to set the stage for that, to, pave the way so that everyone can vocalize what they're thinking about or check themselves or ask productive questions of everyone involved. There's definitely an art to and a science to setting up these collaboration spaces and places where people can work together. I'm glad you mentioned that because if I rewind a bit, when I was talking about cards and frameworks, it was very me-centered as I was explaining it. And one of the biggest lessons I learned probably about 10 years ago was the value of working and learning together. especially as you get in more complex spaces, you kind of have to like pause and listen and work with other people to figure things out. There's just so much information that we don't know until we humble ourselves and think about what might this other person have to say, or this person who I know is going to say something I disagree with. Am I willing to invite them to the meeting to like share their ideas and their opinion? So yeah, so there's a lot there with regards to collaboration. And I was already thinking this direction before I joined Mural. And then at Mural, like you probably experienced it. There was a lot of what I would call authentic collaboration happening. And
Totally, yeah.
you know, you join a meeting, and some of the things that were like norms for the old timers who'd been there forever, and some of us caught on. It was like you join a meeting and like someone's loads up a mural board to take notes, and it's not just one person, it's like multiple people taking notes and editing their notes or helping each other take notes. And then by screen sharing that, if someone captured something wrong, someone else might edit it and fix it. It was just this real hive mind in a good way
Yeah.
tendency.
No, the thing is, I look back on that and I feel like I was really spoiled, and I mean, I take these massive kind of circles through trying to make a point, and I'm going to do it again, but um, I also see, and it's once again, it's just clickbait once again, but people talking about bringing people back to the office or hybrid work versus remote work and all this. For me, that's nonsense. Like, and I think about Mural was purely like a remote experience, and I have to say, like, I've never worked so closely with people in an organization as I worked with Mural. But I don't want to say it's because it was remote. Is I feel like there was something there where it was more around these people understood within the context of that business how to collaborate. And I had a conversation with someone recently where we were reflecting on how people are going or getting forced back to the office, but then they still end up in Teams meetings or they're still doing calls. And I'm going like, it's not a remote hybrid situation. It's like there is a collaboration or thinking together problem going on here. That's the thing. The other thing, because I'm kind of digressing a little bit, is that I just wanted to bring it back to these wonderful little. This is a secret one that I can't show too much of. It's launching next week. The whole thinking together concept, because once again, a friend of mine, we were talking about one of your articles where you were using chess as an example, right? So you have the chess board, you have all the pieces, and you're moving the pawns and stuff around. And a lot of the games and things that we share have similar kind of concepts, right? And cards, and people, what are these guys doing with the cards? But what's interesting for me about that is also when you share with someone is that the attention is off the individuals that are sitting together. It's around the objects on the table, right? And in some way, you get it a lot in Lego, where people talk about Lego Serious Play. It's like you never talk about the person, you talk about the model. And I think a lot of the tools that we explore kind of play in a similar space, right? It's a similar concept, and it going back to thinking things. But I wanna keep my mouth shut a little bit and give you a chance to actually add something to the topic.
Yeah, no, but I think in that what example you just said, that's often about the thing, like in serious play, not the person. That's one of those really nuanced principles that, yeah, if you can talk about or express yourself indirectly through the vehicle of a constructed object, um, and that could be something you construct, like with the Lego bricks. It could be something you project onto something, like the exercises where you grab a card or a photo and you explain why you selected that photo to answer the question. It's one of those nuanced things that allows us, it creates the space for us to say what we might not say otherwise through this indirect vehicle. So there's a lot of power there. I also wanted to go back to, you were talking about we were talking about Mural and the way of working. That there was something, a thought that came to me last year, and this was a presentation I gave. It was kind of riffing off a quote that I heard someone say. They said, "A tool set and a skill set is nothing without a mindset,"
Yeah.
which makes a ton of sense. And I also said, and you got to, as I was thinking critically about this, oh yeah, and you got to add motivation as well. And the way I was thinking about this was, kind of sandwiched at the top and the bottom, you have mindset. How do people think about this? You have motivation. Do people even want this? Right. And that's why we have conversations like killer use cases and inspiring examples to create the motivation, create the urge. Um, and a lot of times we talk about tool set and skill set. Like, here's the tool. Can people use it? Why aren't they using it? And it's because we haven't addressed these bigger things, the mindset and the motivation. And so I think this could transfer to any talk about
Yeah.
culture change or working cultural norms. But while there's definitely like the skill set and the tool set will influence these other things, like you also have to think intentionally about the mindset and the motivation. So anyway, that just popped in my head. I probably have a presentation for every
Yeah, I
every
mean, and I love how you're jumping through
point
these
we're going to make.
like as a peek into your thinking over here. And maybe if we can circle back to the framework that you showed earlier, yeah, there, it is
Oh
really
yeah.
like, yeah, this is kind of if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is something I do in some of the workshops and talks, and I won't do all the detail here because of time, but we go through each of these four images, and the thing I ask people to reflect on is what do they have in common? And you can see there's like people doing a card-based activity, right? And
Yeah,
the modeling, the creating the actual sculpture of DNA, and so on. More people in offices, mural, right? People playing board games. And the thing I ask people to reflect on again is, what do all of these things have in common? And I'm going to pause there. I think you saw this. I can't remember if I gave you the answer or not, but what
no,
what do
you
you
didn't.
observe?
Like because yeah, and because I remember when you showed me this stuff, like, what am I going to say? Right? But
So what are some of the things you see?
yeah, for me, the one thing is that there are people thinking around something, right? That I like. It is like that one image, that number one there is that there's a concept in front of us. It's like one of those Sun Tzu boards. Like there's like a strategy.
Mhm.
People are working around that. There's a concept. Of course, there's people working together, and these artifacts are there to facilitate the thinking, right?
Mhm.
Yes, and I mean, I don't know, like what else. For me, that's basic. It. It's like a. I'm trying to look at some of the other images here.
Yeah.
Look at my bigger screen.
There's a lot of responses to this. You hit upon two of the three big themes, and forgive me if you mentioned the third theme. So, um, you see people giving form to ideas. So the cards represent ideas
Yeah,
here, the model here, the object, right? That you're talking, the shared object that you're talking about, or boundary object. Use that term. So you see that. You see people social, like they're doing it together. Even in the Iron Man example, I like to mention Jarvis is kind of a thought partner in a way, right? So even
yeah.
though he's not a human in the room, but then the I think the thing we overlook a lot is the interactions with these things, manipulating these. And so I love this example here. This is a group of people playing Seven Wonders. Actually, I was at the table. I took this photo, and if you look, like, there are people shuffling through the cards, right? There's ways that the cards are arranged on the table
Yeah,
to mean there's a lot more going on that we often take for granted or overlook. And that's the interactions part. But this thought is since the book came out, which was in 2020. But I look back and I'm like, okay, I think I can uh, figure it out the entirety of the book, which is like 400 pages, down to these three or four phrases. Give form to ideas, manipulate those forms, do this together to solve complex problems. That's the essence of the book. That's what it's all about. And
but
that's
you,
honestly the essence of what I've been talking about ever since and before.
yeah, and you totally like, you. I once again, like every time I talk to you, I kind of latch onto something new. Because when I went through the kind of reflection of the images, I didn't think about the manipulation part. I know you just highlighted that, right? But that's really interesting, in a sense of like a lot of these tools that we look at, is around like moving things around, right? It's not just
Yep.
because I think sometimes what happens, we get stuck on, oh, there's a couple of things on the wall. Okay, let's discuss that together. It's far more powerful if you can manipulate it. You can change it. You can
Absolutely.
shape it into something else, right?
And this was a perspective that my co-author in the book, Carl Fass, brought to it, where I still remember the example he shared with me, super simple one, but when we play a game of Scrabble, for example, and you have the tiles and the thing, how often do we rearrange the tiles and why. And it's something we do quite often, right? We will rearrange the tiles to see different, letter combinations and different word possibilities. And the point there was, if all the thinking happened here in the brain, right, then we just look at the tiles in whatever order they are, think about them, rearrange them in our head, and then make our decision. But that's not how most of us play. We actually interact and we rearrange because we are able to think more deeply and think more broadly when we interact with those information units in the
Yeah.
world. The other example too that I love is if you've ever played a game of chess, um, how often or have you ever like grabbed a piece, you went to place the piece, right? And then before you release, which once you release, it's locked in. You thought you saw, the outcome of that, and you're like, ooh, and you returned your hand and returned to the piece, right?
Yeah.
And it's just another one of those things we often take for granted, but we are interacting with the environment as part of the thinking process. And so by extending the piece to where you would have placed it, you saw something else you missed otherwise, and now you've returned it. And we talk about that fancy word as an example of epistemic thinking, right? Where epistemic interactions, where nothing has changed in the world, like you haven't committed a change, like the piece is not in a new position, yet you've changed your understanding of the space and what you're doing. So yeah, that one, the interactions, it's often overlooked, but it's key. And I would even say, while we're talking about it, like the whole idea of like why do we put stuff on sticky notes and why do we have rules like one idea per sticky note?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all it's to extend our thinking, right? And create this thinking space where we can, shuffle and sort and reorganize those sticky notes in different ways and see different possibilities. Sort on a matrix, now sort on a spectrum, now put it into a Venn diagram, right? And in doing so, you start to see different patterns and different nuance and different details about those units of information that you captured, whether it might have been. So yeah, that's the essence of
Totally. And the thing
everything that I'm
is,
talking about.
and through your work, right? I mean, I know you wrote and I'm going to add a lot of links to the caption of this stream after I'm done. You've written a lot of articles. Recently, you wrote an article on like the hexagon cards, where you dove really deep into different use cases. Can you talk a little bit around like you have this knack of like identifying certain patterns and um, you know frameworks. Can you talk a little bit about some of these patterns as it relates to this, like uses of cards and games and thinking? Um,
Yeah, absolutely. So there's I could talk about the conceptual patterns behind
yeah,
everything. But I think you're wanting me to talk about the literal patterns. So I have a project I've been working on specifically directed at cards, and it's to give names to or in many cases give names to. In other, there's a few cases these things already have names, but name and describe all of these patterns that we have. And actually, I'll pull up an example of this from a talk I gave. See, I mentioned I have a talk for just about
for
everything.
everything.
Let me give me a moment here. Yeah, so the project right now is called How Cards Work. And yeah, and there's a photo. This is way outdated now. I probably have triple that many cards, but um
Yeah, yep.
it's identifying all these patterns in cards. And I have to say, before I talk about some of the patterns, one of my frustrations has been whoops, that's the history of the mental notes. One of my frustrations has been that most serious cards that we have, learning cards, business cards, things like that, not business cards like you hand, but card decks. They're, I don't know, I need a good way to describe them, but they're basic and boring in that
Yeah,
it's just
it's
a list of methods or a list of lenses or a list of even the mental notes card, right? I'm including myself in this of principles from psychology. And where I think it's being steeped in board games and playing a lot of board games, I've become really interested in rich uses of cards and to hold information. So if we go back to that um, different picture, same game, Seven Wonders, you can see all these patterns. Like the cards are color coded, they're staggered in a certain way. Some are slotted under this board, this player board, right? There's all these patterns, and What I would like to do is like name and label these patterns, and then in doing so that those of us making like business games or learning games or serious games that use card decks will have a richer palette of patterns to choose from.
Yeah,
So take a break. Makes sense so far?
totally. Yeah.
You know all this because we chat about it all the time.
Yeah, and there's an awesome talk that you've done, like identifying and going through these patterns, right? Because like if you had to go
Yeah,
and
this one
physically
I'm
look at some of
sharing.
them,
This is the slides, the
yeah,
mural from that presentation. It's recorded, it's out there, but some of the patterns are things like, match one, one card to one of many. I think
yeah,
that's like an apples to apples sort of pattern or Cards Against Humanity. You have cards that will be like an index card. So you have a whole bunch of cards, like your normal like basic and boring cards, but then you have recipes or index cards that tell
yeah,
you which to use. Um, One example I have of this is a yoga deck. And so the numbered cards are all the different types of yoga exercises, but then they have different index cards based on whether you're a beginner, intermediate, like expert, what level of challenge do you want? Thinking about sleeving cards, right? Or having a card with a notch cut out. And a lot of these patterns, like I'm not inventing these. They come from different sources. So this is straight from a game called
yeah,
Gloomhaven, where I won't get into all the details of that game, but the basic pattern is you have a card that goes into a sleeve. And in that game, the way you orient that sleeve, one of these four directions, actually changes the information. So I look at that and I'm like, that's an interesting pattern that we could use in other contexts. Split images, as an example, staggered layering. So there's all these interesting, rich things that we could be doing with cards that we're not. And so I
yeah.
feel like by naming those, maybe more people will use these.
But also, like as a little bit of a side story, you actually, and I alluded to the at the beginning of the show, you go around and change lives. You did the same with me because we were kind of because I did this little card deck, and I wanted people to learn something from it. So at the front there's a statement, and I think at some point you identified, but hey, like you could flip it, right? So you can have the statements and map them all out, but then when you flip the card over, it gives you the answer or the good or the bad, right? And
Hmm.
that was kind of related to some of the frameworks that you just spoke about. But the thing is,
Yeah.
you also mentioned, because I don't want to, like, there's a amazing, like I geek out when I watch that talk. But you also mentioned conceptual frameworks, right? Like, and I feel like that's probably an area that you also like more or less more focusing on now. If I look at some of the work you're doing, right?
Yeah. And when you say conceptual frameworks, like the canvases, the maps, some of those types of
Totally. Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a trifecta of posts coming out over the next several weeks. Specifically showing how I took a topic I was trying to make sense of and created a model or a map. Uh, and again, it wasn't like I need to find three examples. It was just stuff that's happened organically and naturally over the past few months. So one of these, actually, I'll give you a preview. This will be
Nice.
published next week, but let me see if I can open it up here.
Now let me not show you a whole secret URL based on the live stream here.
Oh,
By
I
the
am in a
way, in the
different
meantime,
browser.
we have a question or a comment
Okay.
from a
Yeah.
good friend of ours. Let's see what Jeff Box has got to say. Creating the mindset can be about agreeing on common purpose. It's also an opportunity to change behavior. Can you recall an example where you've gotten teams to participate who are usually reluctant to share? That's a good question.
Yeah, encouraging people to participate where they're reluctant to share. So there's a whole nother thread. There are lots of ways to answer this. One of the threads I'm interested in is imagination and the role that make-believe activities can play in getting people to quickly share what they might be reluctant to share otherwise. And so an example of this would be, well, a common one that is used more and more by teams now is the pre-mortem exercise.
Yeah,
And at the outset of a project, before you start it, you basically, you pull the team together and, let's be honest, half the team's probably like, what's this stupid idea? Which stakeholder came up with it, right? There's lots of fears and reservations. And rather than just sell people on the vision, what the pre-mortem exercise does is it opens the space to share those concerns. And so, as the name would suggest, you basically say it's, 18 months or 3 years or whatever, in the future, this project has failed. Why did it fail? Like write the obituary or write, the pre-mortem for this project. Um, and I think that kind of imagination space allows people to voice their concerns because you're being asked to channel a critical voice, right? To write the
Yeah.
pre-mortem. So it presumes the project failed, and now you've got to answer why. I will build on that. I just listened to a great podcast yesterday, interview with Annie Duke, and she talks specifically about the pre-mortem. And for it to be really effective, you also have to marry it with some commitments. So when people articulate those concerns, you also have to create, to combat bias, you have to create a list of like, okay, if these things don't happen, we'll kill the project. Or if we start to see these signs, then this is what we'll do to true up or ensure success. So pre-mortem to create the safe space to identify all of the things that could go wrong, and then explicit commitments, a plan ahead of time, so you can be objective and unbiased as the project moves forward and know when you're off the rails or not. I thought that was
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful advice. So yeah, imagination. One other example, I know, personal example. I was I knew ahead of time I was being asked to give feedback on the state of the culture in the company. This was at a place I worked at in the past. And I was planning the things I would share. I was planning how I would share it, diplomatically, some of the critical things. And when I came into the room to be interviewed, I remember they said, "We're going to have you wear two imaginary hats." And they gave them funny names. I can't remember what they were, but it was like, positive Polly, right? And then like
Yeah.
negative Nelly or something. And we're going to ask the question, but we're going to have you answer wearing both hats. And so suddenly it wasn't me, Stephen Anderson, answering. It was me, Stephen Anderson, channeling what, positive Polly or negative Nelly might say in response to that question. And I don't know, I felt a sense of freedom to speak more bluntly and frankly and directly about all these things and just skip all the diplomacy and the stuff that, we do to preserve our image or save face and all that. So I've just gone down one thread, but there's a lot of power and imagination and make-believe scenarios for creating a safe space to get people on the same page. I'd
Yeah.
also double down on what you said earlier, the objects, right? Having shared objects that where you're indirectly commenting on things, that's powerful. Um, the same thing's kind of true with canvases, like the business model canvas or four forces or all these things, is you're not arguing with a person. Some expert somewhere has created this canvas based on years, hopefully, of expertise. You're just playing the game. You're just filling out the boxes and answering the questions and discussing those. But there's no one to point fingers at in the space because it's just a tool, right? As a group, you decide to use this tool. You're playing with this tool, playing the game. You're just playing by the rules, right? And you're just answering the question. So I think, yeah, that indirect objectivity, because whether it's with objects or tools, imagination, those are top of mind ways I would think about creating
Yeah.
safety.
I totally like. I was thinking of in my case, like these awkward conversations that you have, and one that I remember specifically, but I want to be careful because I tend to shy away from it these days as a method, but was also with Lego Serious Play where I worked with a product team, and there was different, like the senior guy was there and he was totally like bought into it, and then people were building models, and I remember that a lot of the younger people started using these models to raise a lot of concerns about the specific target audience. And it actually came out like when we walked out the room, the leader actually realized that he was pushing towards the wrong target audience for the business, right? Because there was a customer base, the guys with the wallets, but then there was a bunch of people who were feeding content into the system, like suppliers. And
Hmm.
he kind of ignored the suppliers and focused on the customers, where a lot of people said like the actual work we're doing, the tools we are creating is to enable the suppliers to take care of the customers. And it was very funny for me because they only realized it in the room when they were building with the little bricks and building the models, because no one else
Hmm.
wanted to raise it beforehand. So it definitely happens, but it's tough.
It is tough. Yeah. Great question. Um,
Thank you.
you had asked about frameworks. I said I have three in the hopper, so I can't show a preview, But next week, probably on Tuesday, I've got it looks like a canvas. I'm calling it a map, but it's how I made sense of what actually a product manager does. And full disclosure on that, I think I was, you know, I've been doing interviews for PM positions, and there's all these questions you want to keep in your head. And it's just a long list of bulleted questions like, how would you, run a team or do whatever. And I found just the bulleted list of questions is hard to it's hard to keep track of. But by creating a map or a model of the questions and how they relate to each other, I'm more easily able to reference that and think about that, even if just conceptually in a conversation. So I'll be writing a post, or I've written the post. It'll go live next week. What exactly does a product manager do?
Great.
Um,
And
I
Stephen,
think I think that will be interesting. I've got one that I may have shared with you in the past, all about AI and how I'm making sense of all things AI. And it's a pretty simple framework. See if I can remember it. I hate acronyms, but it's helping me remember. So it starts with stuff we should be talking about, like practical, right? I think it's peace with two E's. Is the tool practical, like and useful? Um, the next E is, gosh, it's just the economics, right? These are concerns, right? The economics, does it make
yeah,
sense? The next one's ethical, and I have it kind of split because there's the visible ethical stuff and the invisible ethical stuff we don't talk about. And you can see this going deeper. Then the C is cognitive, like what are the cognitive costs or concerns of using these tools? And then the final one is just the environmental, right? The biggest one that a lot of companies try to bury. And the framework itself is non-judgmental. In fact, in each of those boxes or rows, there's a space for like rose, thorns, buds, like good things, positive thing
yeah,
or
that's the
negative
thing, right?
things,
Yeah,
and it's just a way for me to organize my thoughts and feelings on things. So if I come across an article about how you can decrease hallucinations in AIs with this, modified RAG model, I'm like, great, I'll put that in the bud category on the, practical, right? Or the is it useful yet? And category. And then I'll come across an article about the hidden environmental concerns and how many, to train the model, how many like, you know, how much water it uses, right? And I'll put that in the environmental, like negative, right? So it's just a way to assess and make sense of all things AI. So that would be a few weeks from now. And then the final one is very personal, but I've been doing more cooking, particularly I checked out a book from the library with Korean vegan recipes, and I've been making stuff from that. And some of these recipes, you approach it and, it's a laundry list of ingredients, like 17, 18 ingredients with steps. And this one dish I made, it was overwhelming the first time. And I laid out every ingredient at a time prepared. But after you've made it once, you see the patterns and how to chunk things and how to sequence things. And so
yeah.
in my mind, mentally, without even drawing it, I had a model of how to do this recipe again and what was critical, what could be adjusted, what shouldn't be adjusted. And so I'll be writing a post around that as well. So look for those over the next month. 3 posts on frameworks I created to make sense of the world around me.
Totally, and we need to talk about how people can get hold of you, but I want to leave that for last because there's an amazing newsletter that you actually send out every it's weekly, right? I should know this
Yeah.
because
No,
it,
twice every 2 weeks.
every
Every two
2 weeks
weeks.
because it destroys my wallet every time it hits the inbox because I have to go buy something. But the thing is, Stephen, I just want to make sure because I'm kind of jumping around a little bit in all the topics, but I mean, ultimately, what we are doing here is to talk about things to think with, right? Or
Mhm.
and some of the topics that we've covered up to this point, like, would you say that it kind of it's a good summary of that? But or can you talk a little bit about around it? So when you say you want to build things to think with, what does that phrase practically mean, right? Like, how is it different from facilitation or thinking aids? Like what is the underlying premise here?
Yeah. So, and if you want to share my screen, that's probably a good time to give a plug for the newsletter I do.
Yeah,
No money, it's free. So it does cost you if you're interested in the things I
yeah, yeah, yeah.
share.
It's very
I don't make any money
expensive,
on that.
people. Don't be
Um,
careful.
yeah, but I started this newsletter, I don't know how long ago, and it was weekly at one point. That's why the time's weird. But I've done 91 issues so far. But basically, every 2 weeks, I share what I call or describe as playful things to think with and think about. Um, And I think part of what I'm trying to do is explore the boundaries of what do I mean by playful things to think with. What I can say is when we talk about things like facilitation activities or thinking these other things, they're often aligned with these domains or disciplines, right? So if you talk about a facilitation tool, who uses a facilitation tool? Who goes to the facilitation hangouts? It's facilitators. And my point is not to like I include lots of facilitation tools in the roundups, but what I'm interested in is looking at those and other things from other domains. So what kinds of frameworks do coaches use? How do screenwriters think about approaching film? And I like to take a lateral or horizontal view across all these domains and say, what are the thinking tools that different domains have created or could create or that have potential, to create that aid our thinking and look at it through that cognitive lens. So it's kind of a kind of a weird niche angle, but
Yeah.
it's not for a particular audience other than people who want to think and want thinking to be more accessible. So yeah, the types of things I include, I mean, lots of card decks. There's always at least one card deck, one learning card deck every time. Usually some models and stuff. There was a special edition, like you mentioned, on hexagons. The latest issue, I had written an article with more thoughts on this, but as I was watching some of the Oscar-nominated short films this year, three of the five nominees, I was like, those are powerful, powerful things to think with. And I had to qualify and say, there's not a
Yeah.
tangible thing in your hand, but in the same way that a good metaphor or framework shapes our thinking, these narratives are powerful things to think with. And more than that, what the three films I comment on do is they show us for 15 minutes, they show us people that we can identify and empathize with in a situation that even if we've never been in or might not be in that exact situation, we can totally relate to it and the feelings going on. What's most powerful, again, in these three films I selected was it doesn't tell you how to think or what the right answer is at the end. It leaves you to wrestle with the question,
That's
what
the
would I
thing.
do? And that to me is what makes it or makes these selections a powerful thing to think with is leaving it open to say, crap, like if I was in that family situation and this happened to us, like what would I do, at different moments or at the end or like what can you do? Um, and then we're left to not just answer what would we do in that situation, but what can I do for families in that situation? And so yeah, powerful, powerful. And that's a very different type of playful thing to think with that I wouldn't have thought of, except
Yeah,
this
you
is
caught me off
ever
guard
present.
when I saw that. I was like, "Hey, this isn't a card deck." But then when I started reading, I was like, "This is actually really interesting to think about, like films in that way, right?" And it does
Yeah.
play that role for sure. Totally makes sense. Um,
Other things like this was just the most recent issue. So I shared this workshop map that was
yeah,
shared on online. What I liked about that was it's the proposal is basically what if you're running a workshop, but visible to everyone is this map, and you can say right now we are sharing opinions. That's what we're doing. That's the stage we're in. And if at some point in the conversation or the workshop or the meeting you shift it over and now we're refining ideas, you could be explicit about declaring that. And what I loved was the agency that gets handed back to the folks in the room, where
yeah,
someone, anyone participating could declare, okay, we're shifting gears. We're focused in a different area right now. Or, hey, I thought we were focused on this. It looks like we're drifting. Can we recenter? So I love that. A metaphor for thinking about rhythm of business, all these interrelated meetings. Oh, I got on a kick with zines last year, and it hasn't gone away. I'm still excited by these small format, condensed, packages of knowledge. And so it's one I came across, a field guide to hype, and it's 32 pages, and it's all about the topic of hype. And just I love the graphic design. It's just beautiful,
yeah.
but the content looks really promising. And I love this comment on LinkedIn. It says, "Don't get fooled by the format." 30 pages. This beautifully laid out booklet beats many of the 300 plus page business books I've read recently.
I'm
And I
sure.
think, yeah, I think that's one of the powers of zines are they're
Yeah,
incredibly concentrated, like tomes of knowledge.
yeah,
And then a card deck, right? A card deck, as always. So
yeah.
yeah,
I'm looking
uh,
behind me. I should probably not. This is very unprofessional of me, but I wanted to grab this off. This also came from a conversation like the Universal Traveler is something that you recommended I
Oh
should
yeah,
pick
yeah,
up.
yeah.
And when I open it up, it definitely has. I need to quickly flip the screen to. Definitely has this kind of zany vibe to it, right? Like it feels like it's been photocopied. Um,
Hmm.
Definitely a great recommendation once
Well,
again.
given when it was made, which was I think it was the 1970s, it
Yeah,
probably was photocopied and clipped out, and yeah,
yeah,
that's part of the charm of that book. Aside from the great content it has, yeah.
yeah. The thing is that I mean, this is one of the things that I think I said to you when we first started talking is like a lot of people think that like it's actually rare that I actually do a session where I use cards. Um, I have to admit that on the stream, and even though like I'm the card guy, but I collect them and I love them. But the thing is, it's really about the frameworks. I usually go and I use the frameworks from a lot of these interactions to then create my own interactions, which is very interesting. But the thing is, I have to admit that I have to go out and buy the cards and sit with them physically in my hand and explore. How do you explore these frameworks? How do you pick them up? Right? Because like, is it just something that you feel you naturally have, or do you have like a method to identify these frameworks or see kind of the conceptual elements behind it?
Gosh, so there's kind of at least two fronts. So one, like the card decks I round up and things I find. I mean, I come across them from all different channels, so I can't identify one. But for me, it's the intellectual curiosity of like, what is this card doing differently in terms of a pattern? How can I add it? What can I learn from it? So there's that. And then the other source is like, working for an employee or working with customers or clients, and you're feet on the ground and you see an opportunity or problem. And I think in those cases, because I've had all these this exposure to board game design and learning theories and these card decks, when a problem or opportunity presents itself, I'm like, I know a solution. I could use that pattern from this, I'd use this content, and then emerge what emerges as a card-based solution. I'll give one example of that. So years ago, I was doing training. It was a train the trainer program. So I'd been trained to carry on this training for self-awareness. And there was this part we would do, and a lot of this fed into rational behavioral therapy, where you're trying to get people to separate facts from beliefs and recognize that most of the things that we get triggered by are beliefs, not the actual facts or the events. And so we had the way I'd been trained on the material, we had a slide that was like, is this a fact or a belief? And we'd go through it. And it was all, let's just be honest, it kind of easy, right? Because they were trying to make the point. And then they would say, great, now go wrestle with your situations at your table, share something with your friend. And I felt like there was a leap from these really simple examples to like a really gnarly, complex problem that someone's wrestling with. And so what I did is I said, we need a way to engage more deeply with whether something's a fact or a belief. And let's look for those hard examples that are going to spark debate and discussion. And so at the company I was at the time, I went back through like 6 months of 15.5, like weekly reports and sentiments and all that stuff, combed through it, found 45 statements that you could debate is a fact or a belief. We as a group, as a team, like whittled it down to the 15 strongest ones, also looking for different like points that these different examples would make. And what came out the other end was a card deck, 15 cards, and a simple exercise. You need to sort this into one of two piles. Is this statement a fact or a belief? And I'm saving the punchline for last. But teams would sit and debate, and you could see them agonize, and they'd end up with kind of equal piles. Some people would they couldn't decide, so they create a spectrum, right? So
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
they could be
yeah,
a fact or a belief. We don't know. And the punchline at the end of all this was every statement you just read is a belief. And at that point, everyone was like, no, wait, what about this? Right. And suddenly, like they had engaged with things, they were engaged with the content. Now they're like leaning forward
yeah,
saying, why is that a belief? Why is it not a fact? And some of it just came down to a single word. And those were easier to explain. So, for example, I was excluded from that meeting. And they're like, well, that's a fact. And I'm like, were you excluded? What would it mean to be excluded? It would mean that someone intentionally said, should we invite Werner there? And decided
oh
no, right?
right, yeah, yeah, yeah,
And like, so the fact is I was not included in that meeting, but the belief is I was excluded from that meeting. And I think that's a common one. Like, why didn't I get invited? They're excluding me, right? And there were other examples that all hit on different points like that. But we were able to really drill into the nuance and help people recognize when is something a fact, like what the camera in the corner would record, and when is something a belief. And once you can understand that, then it opens the doors to all
And it's
sorts of
yeah,
other
and
reflection.
and it's totally not going to work when you do it in a PowerPoint slide, right? Like the
No.
fact that you had to go through the exercise. I think like I kind of tried to allude to at the beginning. It is really like because I think when I asked my first question, it sounded like I was tired of thinking. Like I think it's tired of thinking alone, and sometimes
Mm.
like you feel like in an organization is like, okay, cool, you need to go do the bullet points. We're gonna do a decision. It's really about like, can we also like really explore the question, like, can we are we actually tackling the right problem here? Like or using the words what if, like what if,
Mhm.
like and I think some of these tools make it easier, but it is going back to the core is like, can we think a little bit more, like, or maybe think a bit more about interesting things and angles, or reframe things a little bit more.
Well, think that example that there's so much power in me saying, okay, we went through the 2-minute crash course examples. Now you get to play with these examples. And the next 15 minutes are small groups, at their table, people debating and discussing these things and learning from each other and people sharing their experiences. And, I don't know what gets shared at each of the tables, but that's where the learning is happening, is in those small groups. And in that case, I created a thing to think with, this tool, this toy to play with these cards, right? And the rules of the game. And then they are doing the learning because they're engaging with it. And to
Yeah,
me, that's the magic in that example and that illustration, and what I love and the types of things I love to create is like, what are the things I can create or find, right, and pass on, that people through their engagement with can actually teach themselves and figure things out for themselves. And I know I was reflecting. There was a workshop I did last year, and I was reflecting on the drive back, like what could be better. And I noticed there was one particular activity. It made it crystal clear for me. Like a lot of first drafts of a workshop, like I got to tell people something, right? And then I realized that's flawed. So the next version, it's I tell people that it's interactive, right? So maybe I'm gonna go through a series of slides, and as a whole room, you tell me is A, B, C, or D, right? Um, and I was reflecting on that's where this particular exercise had landed. And I'm like, well, how can I flip it so that we're not going through that as a whole room, but I can put those same questions at each table and they can debate and discuss. And then all I have to open my mouth for are the ones that people disagree with or want to
yeah,
discuss or talk about more. Or I love this, like if people find an error with what I'm saying is the right answer, they can challenge me on it and call me out on it because I'm not perfect. Even as the instructor, like I'm still learning from people. And so the next version of that activity will actually be the quick setup. And then, okay, now there's a game you're going to play at the table and discuss among yourselves. If you have any questions, we'll talk about it after. So yeah, it's kind of like monologuing, interaction to like group discovery and group
yeah.
learning on their own. It's kind of the stages that these activities go through.
But it's I love listening to you as you explain it. Like and there's also a lot of experimentation, right? And taking the leap to try it, and then kind of rethinking things a little bit. But you've also like recently also like hosted a lot of collaboration workshops, right? Where you've been putting together a lot of this thinking uh, to get things
Hosting
going.
more of
Yeah,
them. And I hope to do more. The workshop, the main workshop I lead with is a visual collaboration workshop, which is kind of a catch-all for
yeah,
how to work with these information objects, how to work with different canvases, models, things like that. So that's kind of the workshop I lead with and bring to different companies. From there, it can go in a bunch of different directions, like thinking tools for product managers, for example, or whatever it may be. But yeah, visual collaboration is the one. And I would love to, I haven't done this yet, but I'd love to do like a business game design
yeah.
workshop and just share some of the stuff I've picked up and learned and is still learning about that space.
Yeah, those, I mean, those are like I think we've discussed this before, but like for me, the next level is like the simulation games, the bigger business games. Super interesting.
Mhm.
Now, Stephen, like we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I don't want to like keep you too long, but can we do a couple of rapid fire ones here?
Sure, let's do
And
it.
this might take us down a bit rabbit hole anyway, but let's see if we could keep it short and sweet. But we've
All
seen a
right.
resurgence of and the interest in tactile games, right? At some point, we went
Mhm.
very digital, and analog tools are very popular. Do you think is this just a nostalgic backlash, or is there something in this whole physical analog stuff versus the digital, right?
Yes and yes. There's probably nostalgia, all right? Particularly cards. The reason cards work so well at this point in time is because when you bring a card into a place where you don't see games or cards, like a business setting, all of the associations are with games and play and fun and social things. So you get all those powerful associations. So not quite nostalgia, but it along the same lines. Um, Cognitively speaking, there are tactile benefits to working with like cards or picking up pieces and moving them on board that we just haven't, or I don't know if we can replicate in 2D digital simulations. um Not that it's digital versus analog, like they both have their pros and cons. I think the bigger thing is to be aware of the pros and cons, or the strengths and weaknesses of each medium, and choose accordingly for your purpose. But I know this was a quick rapid fire question. I do want to share this. This was
Let's go.
in my book, and it was one of these things where I was thinking about normally in where did it go? Where did we go? When we think about cards online, like we think about these types of things, right? Like cards to represent, real estate listings or whatever it may be. And in terms of interactions, they're very, very limited. And even some of the tools we have, Miro, Mural, like they're still very like they may look like a card, but it doesn't flip or rotate or do a lot of the things like a card should do. There's some plugins to solve that, but there's some technical challenges there.
Yeah.
When I look at this, and this was a photograph, I just took one of the card decks I had and I laid it all out. I'm like, look at all of the meaning that's conveyed in all of these, the ways we've laid things out and stacked things and staggered them and rotate. Like there's so much you can do with cards by how you interact with them and how you arrange them relative to each other. So this pile probably
Yeah,
means
there's
like
meaning
nothing,
in how
right?
you
Or
put
crap.
down the card, right?
There's meaning in how you put it down. And that I just haven't seen that translated well digitally yet. I hope to see that soon, but um, yeah, I don't know. There's just so much you could do. And notice these aren't single cards at a time. These are cards in combination with each other. So staggered or lined, but oriented differently, or, lined up in a row. Like we need like a digital canvas type of space to work with cards in this way. We also need those interactions, the flip, the sort, the shuffle, all those things that, like I said, are kind of available as plugins, but the
Yeah, it's
execution's
not
still
perfect,
quite
right?
right there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Stephen, the other thing I wanted to ask you, like, if you had to, if, and this is probably a difficult one to answer, but let's try anyway. Like, what makes it? And I say card deck here, but maybe anything, any tool. What makes it good? Is it the content on it? Is it the interaction design, how it's used, the ecosystem, or the things that's created around it? Like, what makes it good for you?
Uh, all of the things you mentioned, yes, yes, and, and yes. Definitely the quality of content to start with that. I think that is key. And I don't know, I call a lot for the newsletter from LinkedIn posts, but I'm starting to see a lot more posts that feel like an AI generated, things and wrote, and I'm like, that concerns me. And I don't know, you can tell when like the quality of the content are really good and when it's not. So I think being able to spot and spy good content and content that helps you think better, or think more critically or in a nuanced
Yeah.
way. Definitely the interactions, as we've talked about, being able to interact with them to extend our understanding, in particular, tapping into these interactions where cards can play off of each other, or you can flip to reveal the answer, or whatever it might be. And then the social, like you mentioned, bringing people together. So yes, yes, and yes, and probably more. Um, you ended that with, for me personally. So just subjectively, personally, like what I'm looking for right now are cards with interesting patterns that
Yeah.
play off of each other. Because that excites me, interests me. Cards that are another like a laundry list of 52 things on this topic. I'm like, okay, people have done
Yeah,
that
like the
before.
flashcard kind of thing, right?
The flashcard, yeah, maybe
Yeah.
that's what I should call them, flashcards. Yeah, there's enough of those out there. There are some spaces where we don't have them yet, like like plenty of self-reflection questions. But the card deck I just shared in the latest newsletter was self-reflection questions, but they were tied to environmental issues, climate change issues, and aligned to the UN SDG goals. So like, okay, I haven't seen reflection for question
Yeah.
cards, which are pretty common, applied to this space. So that's nice. But even there, I drilled in and said, there are some questions that are going to be, what can you change as an individual with regard to climate change? I was more interested content-wise in the things that I could do as an individual to push on or change the system, because it's definitely a systemic problem. Climate change is a systemic problem with, corporations and billionaires also involved in this. So as I was looking at the cards, I was kind of looking at the content in that through that lens. So yeah, there's a shotgun blast to your question, answer to your
Totally. Like,
question.
I mean, and I shared a lot of what you're saying. Like, I mean, you did switch me on to kind of the physical orientation, interaction of these cards, and the frameworks, and how you combine them. It's totally like today, the manipulation. I have a couple of short ones still, but I wanna just park on this one. If you had a blank check to invent a cognitive workspace from scratch, no tech constraints, what would it look like? What modes of thinking would it amplify or discourage?
Ooh, I love that question. And I'm probably going to be thinking about it long after we to this ends. I would say in a lot of ways, museums embody a lot of what I'm talking about. So you go to most good, rich, modern museums, and there's a level of interactive activity, playfulness, discovery, sometimes narrative that happens. And so in many ways, it would resemble a museum. I would look for ways to bridge the digital and the physical.
Yeah,
Definitely look for that. I think that's missing. I'd look for ways to bridge bits and atoms. So I love what's happening with Dynamic Land, Brett Victor's project in California, where you go into a space and the whole space is like a collective computing space where we do computing together, but it looks and feels more like doing arts and crafts, but we are doing computational things. So it'd have traces of that. Um, Also, the types of things that people engage with, and this is where it starts to diverge from like museums, wouldn't be so much topical, like about, tectonic drift or something like that. It would be more about like these concepts, like the concept of delegation or leadership or safety or all these things. And how do we create it? What, tears it down? Um, and that said, I think there would be playfulness to it. So it wouldn't be like, do you want to go through the door to learn about, how to delegate things? It'd be some mysterious, playful phrasing where you're not sure what it is until you go through the door and now you're immersed in this space.
yeah.
And like, I didn't know I was walking into the critical thinking space. This is awesome,
And
right?
that's the escape room. Try and
The
get out of
escape
that
room.
one.
Yeah, yeah. So escape room, museum, dynamic land, digital, virtual, like all
Yeah.
blurred together. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and then I want to wrap this up by asking you a couple of questions around where people can get hold of you, because we've spoken about the newsletter, right? I definitely recommend that. Can you just remind? I think I'm just going to go to the share screen again. Where do we sign up for the newsletter? Thinking
Yeah, the
things.
newsletter. It's at themightymindsclub.com, and actually newsletter.mightymindsclub.com, themightymindsclub.com, and that'll be in your show notes. So
Yep.
definitely there. And then I do post, like I said, I'm posting a lot more lately on Medium. So it's my name, stevenanderson.medium.com.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been posting about something every other week. There's some interesting stuff there. And then I do have a personal website. It's kind of outdated. I don't maintain it, but it does have a contact form that functions. So
I get
that's
all of Stephen in there.
owenpainter.com. So if you want to reach out to me about anything, I think there is a way to reach out to me there and with a type form message. So
Yeah,
yeah,
send him
those
all
would be
kinds
three
of
ways.
good vibes. Stephen, like I joked in the beginning of the show also about the production of your twisting your arm for the car deck. I know that somewhere in some place you are working on a new project. Are you able to talk
Drum
about
roll,
that yet?
drum roll. And let me hear it. Let me hear it.
I should have sound
Got to type
effects.
first. This is new, and It's a teaser holder page to collect email addresses. But I am people who have been following me for a while know I've been talking about Kickstarter reprint forever. There have been hurdles and things, distractions, but there is one happening in September. It'll either be like beginning of September or mid-September on Kickstarter. And if you sign up here, you will get notified in the lead up or the weeks leading up to that Kickstarter relaunch. So I am reprinting the Mental Notes card deck, and in the
Yes.
background you can see a teaser of some of the changes and the new
Yeah.
packaging there.
Yeah, there's a weird South African guy who does reviews on these things that really desperate to get his hands on it. He's heard some good things from my other friends. Stephen,
I can
just
probably comp that friend a free copy or an
okay.
advanced copy review. So yeah.
Like his wife's going to divorce him if he spends more of the rent money on cards. Stephen, I've jumped around a lot. I just want to say thank you. But also before I close it down, I just want to ask you, is there anything that I've missed? We've spoken about the newsletter. We've spoken about craziness of cards. We alluded to the Kickstarter. All this information will be shared also in the email and in the show notes. Anything else?
There's always more, and that can be a sequel down the road. So
Totally.
yeah, this has been great, and I've had a blast talking about this stuff with you.
Stephen,
So thank you.
thank you so much. Let me quickly jump across to close this down, and then I'll catch you afterwards. Thank you very much for joining the Creative Coffee Break. Stephen is awesome, and I will be posting and sharing in my newsletter that you can see over there. You can jump into that newsletter. I don't send a lot of them because I'm terrible. I'll send the show notes and also links to the Kickstarter. I really recommend, and the Stephen's card deck is highly recommended to go check that out. I also have a little sneaky preview. I'm not allowed to show this yet. This is launching next week. And I'll also have the author on the live stream pretty soon, which I'm also excited about. So once again, drop a couple of comments if there's any ideas or thoughts. And if you watched this far, thank you for watching, and catch you in the comments.